Welcome to the Poynting Antennas webinar. I'm Ailana Haroff and I do digital marketing for Poynting Antennas. Today's webinar is titled Taking Fixed Wireless Access from Bits to Bytes and is presented by Dr. Andre Fourie. For those who does not know Andre yet, just a short introduction. Andre completed his PhD in engineering at the University of the Witwatersrand in 1991 and was a professor at the same institution until 2001. Andre is listed as an inventor in more than 30 patents and published more than 50 academic papers and 4 books. He founded Poynting Antennas in 2001 and is currently Poynting Group CEO. The webinar today will be about 40 minutes long, and we'll have a question and answer section at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to type your questions into the questions tab as we go along, and we will ask Andre and some other panel members to answer at the end of the video. We are also recording this webinar and a copy will be available on our YouTube channel. Okay, so today Andre will take us from the bits and the bytes, or the bits to the bytes of cellular mobile networks, how this translates to capacity and how the mobile network operator is able to capitalize on the additional capacity of the network. Andre will start with explaining how the bits and bytes are transmitted over the radio link, how an external antenna is able to enhance the revenue-making capacity of the network, and at the same time enhance the end-user experience. We will also take you through the dollars and cents, how this makes sense for the operator. Over to you, Andre.
Thank you, Ailana. Just first confirm that you hear me clearly.
I hear you and we can see you well.
Thanks a lot. I really want to thank all of the people in Australia and Australasia region. We were really pleasantly surprised that we got such an interest. I'm very glad that we're doing this at a time that's suitable to you and not just at one time as we did before. And I'm surprised at the starting interest we're getting. So let's just carry on. Sorry, got this typical, yeah. Okay, we all see these type of terms, RSSI, etc., etc. How does it affect data and capacity? Some of the technical people may know what I'm saying now, but I just find it quite useful to go back to basics so that we just all start getting an idea again of what are we actually talking about when we're talking about data. If you look at a signal is actually just a sine wave, one way or the other, at your carrier frequency, so at 1700, 900, whatever you're sending. Signal is actually that magnitude, in other words, the strength of whatever you're receiving. The noise is something that sits here. It's a small amount of noise, random noise. It's always there, okay? So it's not necessarily external noise. Every receiver has got a fundamental limit of internal noise. So noise is not something we can avoid. Ultimately, signal and noise combine, and we get a slightly uglier type of waveform. And it's that number, which should be large. That's one that's often fixed, but can be larger. If you divide 2, you get signal to noise. So if I say the signal here is 10, that would be 1. This will be a 10 to 1 as a linear value, but we often take it to dBs. And by coincidence, 10 in dBs is also 10 dB. So that will be a 10 dB signal to noise ratio. So just good. And the main lever we've got to improve signal to noise, by the way, is not reducing the noise unless it's external. The main lever is increasing the signal. Okay. And of course, that's what we have to do with an external antenna. Now, let's look at modulating data onto such a signal. Clearly, we can't just send the guy a nice sine wave because that's no information. So right in the earlier days, we got ways to manipulate the sine wave. We can manipulate its frequency, its amplitude, and its phase. Now, a sine wave, of course, looks like that. That's considered from the peak to the 360 degrees, and we can shift that phase. So we never transmit these 4 together. We can transmit the guy like this, and then do a sudden shift to this. That would shift it by 90 degrees. And shifting by 90 degrees is called QPSK, quadrature phase shift keying. And because you've now got 4 possible sine waves, never together, we're shifting them, okay? The rate at which we can shift is fixed by the bandwidth, that actual megahertz bandwidth that the operator owns, whether it's 10, 20 megahertz, 5 megahertz. I'm going to sort of assume a value of 10 megahertz bandwidth. The rate at which we can shift between symbols is called the symbol rate. And for arguments purposes, not exactly equal. Normally symbol rate slightly less than the bandwidth, but let's assume we've got a bandwidth that will support 10 mega symbols per second. That means it can change 10 million times per second, and each will send a symbol. Now, a symbol would be in this case either 90 degrees. You can see it's represented on this constellation diagram like these dots. The red dot would be the one waveform. We shift that waveform, we get to this dot, and shift it again, and we've got 4 possible. If we do 90 degrees, we've got 4 possible symbols or states for the symbol. Let me keep to correct nomenclature. That indicates the phase between them. But note that that there is equal to the height. So that's the amplitude. In QPSK, we don't change the amplitude, but that's why the further schemes are always called QAM, quadrature amplitude modulation, because we do start using it. Now, just to make it clear, in this case, because we've got 4, we can make the first one represent 0, 0, 2 bits. Next one, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. That's the only combination of 2 bits we can ever find. But note that even though we've got 4 states, we can send 2 bits. So it's 2 to the number of bits. In this case, it's 2 to the 2 is equal to 4. So you've got 4 states, you can transmit 2 bits. So in this case, the receiver will get, the transmitter would get 2 bits. If those 2 bits are 0 and 1, it will set the carrier to this phase. Then it will wait for the next 2 bits. If the next 2 bits is 1, 1, it will set it to this phase. What I'm trying to say, so we're still going at 10 mega symbols per second, but each symbol now contains 2 bits. So we have 20 megabits per second. So we do a bit of magic. We get more data through the same bandwidth. But this is the capacity of the base station, 10 mega symbols per second in this example. Now let's look at how we represent noise in that same constellation diagram. So if you've got a weaker signal, you can see lots more noise. We would be able to try to transmit exactly that, but of course the noise would be added. And you can see that the noise changes the magnitude, it also changes the phase. As long as we stay within this quadrant, it will be detected as a 0, 1. That will be detected as a 0, 0. You can see with this level of noise there, and this is a statistical spread, we're no longer going to receive this guy. We're going to sometimes receive this guy, sometimes that guy. And unfortunately, sometimes this guy. So even though we're trying to transmit a 0, 1, we will be transmitting a 1, 1, and that would be a bit error. And of course, this is what we're trying to reduce. The only way to get it more reliable, in other words, to get fewer bit errors, because this causes data errors and slows down the system, and of course becomes entirely unusable at some point. We have to increase the signal to noise. Now, I couldn't draw it properly. If we go out indoor to outdoor, we typically go 16 dBs up. 16 dBs is a factor of 40. And what we've done is we've increased the signal 40 times. Now that would clearly be ridiculous to draw. We didn't actually lower the noise. Signal went up 40, but suddenly you can see higher signal to noise, the better focus. The less spec we've got around the actual symbol that we want to transmit. So I think that illustrates just the basics and why do we need higher signal to noise in order to clearly transmit 4 bits. If we only do 2, which I haven't illustrated, of course, that would be this big. And in which case we can, with lower signal to noise, transmit 1 bit per symbol. Now let's look at what's known as QAM. First one is QPSK. And I think the interesting part of this is, and all of this, by the way, is not just because I want to teach you some basics, is all of this is just trying to in detail explain why does signal to noise increase throughput. And by application, why does a better signal, a much better signal, improve the amount of data you can send? So you can see here we've got a sort of noise that will be suitable for this. This is called decision boundaries. Okay, so you want to keep everything within this decision boundary, and it will be detected as this. So dot is a little bit big. We need to keep the boundaries or the area big. If we get 6 dB roughly better signal, we can put in, instead of 4, we can go put in 16, twice the number of states for that symbol. And once again, note the reason we can do it is now the boundaries are smaller. In other words, the areas which will represent the different symbols. And that allows us to do that, so we need better signal to noise. We can't try and fit those in because they will overlap and you won't be able to do it. But what we've achieved, we're still running at 10 mega symbols per second. You can see, and I just want to re-emphasize this because there is some confusion on this. If you now put all the possible combinations of 4 bits. Okay, you can see that with 16, we can send 4 bits. So 2 to the 4 is equal to 16, hence 4 bits, not 16 bits. Okay, so now we can do 4 bits per symbol, okay, with a considerably higher signal to noise ratio. 4 bits per symbol means that we still got 10 megasymbols per second, but now we can send 40 megabits per second. Okay, so, and that's the same. I mean, I'm using the same resource of the base station. Base station can do 10 megasymbols dictated by bandwidth, which is a natural resource and is scarce, as we all know. As we increase it more, but note, that's quite an increase. I have to quadruple the signal, 6 dBs twice and twice, and I make the dot smaller. And in this case, I can fit in 64 different states, and 64 different states is 2 to the 6, so it will give you 6 bits per symbol. And hence, we are now cheating nature quite nicely, okay? We're going out 60 megabits per second, still using just 10 megasymbols. And lastly, 256, not lastly, this is currently, most probably, I think the newest release of LTE would go one step more. And here I can go 8 bits per symbol. Okay, so now I can send 80 megabits. But please just note, this is fantastic. We've done a lot of technology here, and we've gone up to 80 megabits per symbol in a 10 megasymbol channel, but we pay for that. In other words, the cost of this is receiving a signal, and if you take 2 times, 4 times, this is 8 times, 16 times, 32 times 16. We had to increase the signal by 80 dB, almost roughly 100 times to what we needed to do this. Now, when a radio communicates with a base station, it will see, is the signal strong enough? Then it will do this. Okay, so it can send a lot of data to this guy per symbol. The signal is weak, it has to downgrade and figure out what works. And to this guy, also using the same symbols, it can send much less data. I think this already starts giving everyone an idea of why it is such a severe impact on capacity. Or in other words, the signal or the average signal to noise that your users get impact the base station's capacity, because that base station just now doesn't have more channels or anything. It's got that 10 megasymbols in a cell per second. That 10 megasymbols must serve everyone in that cell. And if some guy wants to use many megasymbols in order to send a little bit of data, it obviously reduces the capacity of that cell. Now we go to external antennas. I must just note that we've got several papers and so forth for people that technically would be interested in what I'm saying here. But if you now look at a base station and it transmits to someone that's got an indoor router, it's a very common thing to use, especially in the cellular area. That signal, the pure signal inside here, not the signal even received by this guy, is typically 16 to 20 dB lower. Now that is clearly easy to understand. Firstly, it has to penetrate, but believe me or not, the penetration is not the worst problem. The problem is it penetrates through various things. When it penetrates through various apertures, it starts creating like different sources which interfere with each other, creating a truly nasty, messy multipath situation, and means that your guard band needs to be much larger, and hence you get overall 16 to 20 dB. That's excluding antenna gain. Of course, you could also have noise in the house coming from the outside, and these being omnidirectional antennas, if there's external noise, gets fairly affected by that because it sees in all directions. If we now take that same router and fit it with an external, say, cross-polarized antenna when we're talking 2x2 MIMO, then we get an immediate increase just by going outside. So let's assume the antenna gain is cancelled by cables because we've got cable loss, but normally we can do quite a bit better. We get 16 to 20 dB increase. Now this is absolutely certain. This is not an exaggeration. It could be larger. We've installed about 10,000 different antennas outdoors where we do the different measurements, just because in South Africa, our distributor here does a lot of installations, and we see quite a bit larger figures than this, and most of that was actually done at lower frequency. As the frequency gets larger, of course, the penetration gets even worse. So that gain is there, and 20 dB equals 100 times stronger signal, just to put it in perspective. You can see this is about the difference that will take you from 2 bits per symbol to 8 bits per symbol in a typical case. So from just receiving a signal to absolute maximum rate. Also very stable. Note that the indoor signal gets affected by people moving, etc. Of course, this outdoor signal much less affected by the surroundings and changes in environment. Okay, so the one way, sorry, my throat just gets dry. The one way to increase data throughput is, in other words, pumping more bits per symbol, and that's dependent on signal to noise. The other bit is to use MIMO, multiple input, multiple output. In LTE, we typically use 2x2 MIMO, 2 antennas on the receiver and transmitter. And that is a completely alternative and separate way of increasing data rates. In other words, it is not linked to the signal strength. This is linked to how well you can separate the 2 signals that gets transmitted from each other. So even if you've got a weak signal and you can separate it, you can get an increase with 2x2 MIMO. If you can separate them fully, you can get a doubling of the rate. If it was 4x4 MIMO, you can go up to 4 times. More difficult, and some videos explain this. 2x2 can easily be done for the reason that it's done with polarization. If you can't get much separation, you don't get that MIMO gain. So MIMO gain is not like an automatic thing that you get. So if you look at an indoor signal, and in this case, they use polarization. Everyone virtually does because it's the most effective way when it's only 2x2 MIMO. When it gets more, you can't do that anymore. Comes in, every time a signal reflects, the polarization shifts. So no longer is there any guarantee that you've got 2 orthogonal polarizations. And of course, you haven't even got cross-polar antennas typically on an indoor router. But even if you add polarization, it becomes mixed up, and you've got multipath and pretty uncertain. And typical indoor systems like that, where the transmitter is not always indoor, would get between 1 and 1.4 type of MIMO speed gain. Not that easy to get it when you've got this type of unpredictable situation. The one beauty of 2x2 MIMO is that if you use a cross-pole antenna, in other words, antenna that is polarized 90 degrees to the other one, and it is outdoor, so the polarization is preserved all the way from transmitter to the receiver, you are absolutely guaranteed to get 2.0, 2 times gain. And it's not even 1.95, it is typically 2 times the maximum rate. So if you could transmit, for example, 8 bits per symbol, that would have given us 80 megabits per second on one wave. We can now do another 80 megabits per second on the red wave, which means that we can get up to 160. And you can now see where the typical LTE speeds come from. So the 10 megahertz, 160 would be a typical quoted rate. You see, we can do 160. What they never tell you is that 160 will have to serve everyone sitting in this sector or sitting in this cell. But clearly 160 is a lot more to service a certain area. Of course, it only happens when you've got very high signal to noise, very good separation between polarization. So for these cases and handouts, it is a very theoretical figure like all of us know. But in outdoor antennas, it can actually be done. Okay, this is, sorry, let me just settle. I'm going a bit fast between slides, I apologize. Here we've got a situation where we draw the type of signal that people will receive. These are about 6 dB variations. And that's not just the signal, of course, that's the link signal. So the reason why this guy has got a much better region here where a guy would receive maximum signal, it's not because this tower is any different from this, exactly the same cell phone tower. All that happens here is that we assume here that the guy is equipped with an external antenna, and hence he's got a link gain, which is about 16 to 20 dB, assumed 16. And that means 16 is equal to 40, square root of 40 is equal to 6. So the radius at which you will get your maximum signal increased by 6. So that red circle is 6 times longer radius than the left-hand one for indoor. And of course, that again, it makes actually a 40 times increase, real 40 times increase in the area that will now get maximum signal. And you can see In an old-fashioned system, they would have geared it up to here, which is about 6 dB signal to noise. Okay, because everyone would be able to do voice calls all the way up to the edge here. But as we started data, of course, the cell's capability went down, or its capability to do the max. It can still do data at this point here. But you can see this cell can do all data at either max or half of max, if I can put it like that. So everyone in the gray area can get 2 bits per symbol through in terms of signal strength. In the next area, they can get 4 bits. Orange, they can get 6 bits per symbol through. And in the red areas, they can get 8 bits through. Now, to some extent, this explains already what people tell me, why don't just equip the guys with bad signal with antennas. Bad signal in this case is anything from red, because this guy here already consumes twice your capacity of your base station. So if you look at this small area, to try to save on that area as a function of this whole area is meaningless. And this makes a lot more sense, where virtually everyone can go into the red area where they can be served typically with 8 bits. And then we have to multiply by the MIMO gain. As I've indicated here, we can multiply now whatever area the guy is in, and be multiplied by 2, because with the external cross-polarized antenna, by the way, that thing does not need to be cross-polarized the same as the base station. Base station can be plus minus 45, this can be plus minus 90. I've had this argument, and if anyone afterwards want to discuss, I can explain why. But as long as it's 90 degrees to each other, it doesn't matter that it's lined up. The MIMO algorithm takes care of that. Now on this side, I've assumed that we can multiply by 1.2 times, so they also get a bit of an increase due to the MIMO signal transmission. And here you get ultimately what you get in the 4 different signal regions here. So if we now look at this base station with a theoretical capacity of 1, okay, what I mean by 1 is that would be when you've got some acceptable level of service. In other words, as more people get up, you're dividing your spectrum. Remember, the spectrum is actually 10 mega symbols per second between the users. So the way you can illustrate capacity is if the guy's at a low symbol rate, like in this case 2.4 symbols per second, you can see that he uses a fairly high rate. We just take 1 divided by the rate, and that would give you about 0.4, okay? And that would give you quite a bit better, say 1/7, that would be about 0.15. So he's taking only 0.15, this guy's taking 0.4 of the capacity, and so forth. If we add, in this theoretical case, now sort of, for argument's sake, each of those little symbols represent 10 houses, you can see that I'll be able to fit those guys in, which is roughly 40 houses in my example. Now, that same base station, so this capacity is 40 customers. And when I say capacity, you must remember I can serve however many people I like, but at this point, they'll get a certain quality of service. In other words, they'll be sharing things, and the bit rate would be dropping down, typically in a shared situation like that, to a much, much lower rate. And certainly in the left-hand case, that happens rapidly. Now we do the same here, and each time, by the way, I just take this number here, and wherever the house is, if it sits in orange, it's 1/12. In this case, the same was done, because now I can get, in this case, 12 bits per symbol to this guy, 16 to these guys in the red. Okay, so they would actually be getting the 160 megabits per second. So for them, you want to transfer a 10 megabyte file, okay, it will take most probably, if I have a quick calculation, it will take most probably less than a second. And here, it will take much longer. And that is effectively why this base station, same cost, same infrastructure, and this guy would be able to service, if you look at the equation there, about 150 customers. So even though the maximum rate is a much bigger difference, of course, we can't assume that it's going to go from minimum to maximum. These guys also sit with some people in higher rates. The average we find overall, and that's been confirmed by various studies international, is about a 4 to 5 times increase in the capacity of the cell. These guys will get the same level of service as the the guys here, the 150 customers, get exactly the same service as the 40 customers in terms of the amount of data that you can pump through to them. Okay, there's lots of other things on the left that's not so nice, but in essence, I'll be able to sign up 150 customers at some package, and they will get some level of service, contention, etc. On the left, I'll only be able to 40, and I'll reach the same sort of level of service. So a massive increase in the number of consumers I can service here. Okay, what does this mean in practice? Of course, it's not only the case that you can sign up more customers. I was speaking now from the case of an operator. Okay, so the operator would not be able to go higher than that because the guys will start throw away and change providers because the service will just become totally inadequate. But if we now look at the practical case, and perhaps this is another good way of showing this capacity, we can sit with 4 houses on this side and of course service each of them with a movie in the same time that on average we can service a movie to a guys using indoor antennas. And I think this is just a very visual illustration of the fact that that same base station, okay, can service 4 people with external antennas at the same capacity as what it would need to be able to serve only 1 person on this side. Also note that if only 20% of your customers have got slow rates, they would take up virtually half the base station capacity. So if you look at this situation here, these 4 guys would be half this 1 guy. You take the other half of your bandwidth in order to take 1 movie down. So clearly, every slow guy cheats you out of 3 other customers. Well, not cheats you, that's the effect of it. When your cells have extra capacity, that's always how it starts. You're just getting guys on. So capacity is not yet a problem. There's still, of course, a much nicer rate that the guys on the right get. So make no mistake, for the users, having the external antennas is always a massive improvement. In this case, the operator doesn't see more money. He's only got 4 guys here and 4 guys in another cell which uses internal antennas. But clearly, the users on the right-hand side have got a much better experience. Okay, now we get to the essence, and this is such a no-brainer at the end of the day, but this is not often recognized by mobile operators, not because there's anything wrong with them or they come from a different technical background. It is where they're coming from. They're coming from servicing mobile users, then started to add some fixed users with routers. And the whole philosophy has really been around mobiles. And with mobiles, you have to accept people with bad signal. I mean, that's the whole idea. You have to service whoever is there, driving in a car, sitting in a house, and so forth. So they've never really had a way of just increasing people's signal. So that never played a big role. But now that we look for pure fixed wireless case, or even some of your users are fixed wireless, let's now look at revenue. You must remember that there was a cost associated with taking this number of consumers in a cell by a factor of 4. And that cost was to provide every user, every consumer, that's assumed up to now, with an antenna had to be installed. These are typical numbers that we find in Europe. I know the US is similar. In South Africa, the installations cost may be less. And then we assume that the contract or the income to the operator, it's some package that people buy for €20 a month. Don't know whether that's typical. We had to assume something there, and €20 does seem to be a sort of figure that makes sense in most cases. So that's an additional cost. He has to spend that additionally for every house that he equips with an antenna. And what I really want to show is, at the moment, this is seen as an extra cost. No, we're not going to do it unless the signal is bad, or only for some users, etc., etc. What I will show is that if the operator absorbs this cost, don't consider it as a cost for the customer, then he will actually make more profit in a fixed wireless service. And I suppose it's simple from everything what we've said before. So we go back to our previous example, and that is fairly typical. So if you you'll only be able to service about 40 users with indoor routers. And by the way, those numbers are close to typical. I've spoken to operators here that starts offering specific fixed wireless packages. And you must remember this is just additional to the coverage they provide to mobiles. And they're often restricted to this type of number per sector, in other words, per cell, because they know that any more would start bringing the cell capacity down and the experience down. But over a 24 2-year contract, this is the revenue that they will earn on the left-hand side from that cell. And now on the right-hand side, it's on the one hand easy because we're now going to have 150 users. Okay, so the revenue will increase quite a bit. But of course, to play fair, we also have to take into account that we're now going to spend what seems initially like a large amount of money on every single user. We're equipping every single user with an antenna, which will be 450 users, equal to that amount. And if you look at the first 2-year contract, we will be earning that much revenue. But if we subtract, and note I'm subtracting the cost of those antennas, then we would still be earning 33,000 euro or dollars, pretty similar numbers. And in this case, you can see that there's already a massive improvement. So really difficult to see what is difficult to understand about this. And if it's another 2-year contract, because people don't always just stop after 2 years, they take out another contract, that's probably a lot more likely on the right-hand side because they're getting very nice service, stable, and many other aspects. And then the difference gets massive because remember, the same antenna will be used. It's not like you have to reinstall an antenna to give another guy another 4 years of service. And then the difference becomes massive. As you can see, you're now earning more than twice, close 2.5 times the income from this cell. Remember, using the same infrastructure. Okay, you didn't extend your infrastructure to do this. You simply transferred the cost of infrastructure to include antennas with every user. Okay, you consider that as part of CapEx. You spend a little amount of CapEx to increase your revenue by a factor of 4 or 5 times. I think we just assumed 4 times roughly. If you look at 40 to 1, not even 4 times, but it's already making a lot of sense. Okay, and I find people think about this and they say, what on earth is the reason why this is not done everywhere? Okay, why is this not done by everyone? The one aspect I do want to mention is people that do only fixed wireless provision. Has done this for years. Okay, so what I say to them is not at all new. This is what I mean, how people are influenced by their own history. So the biggest operators with fixed wireless worldwide that I've encountered is the wireless internet service providers that started providing services at 2.4 and later at 5.8. Now, I can tell you now that not a single WISP anywhere on earth, may be wrong, but pretty close, will ever provide these wireless service to an indoor router. So you go look at all of them, they right from start understood perfectly well that they have to go for external antennas. Otherwise, their capacity in their cells will become severely limited. Okay, so interesting to note that if people come from that environment, they don't even think about guys using indoor routers. The mobile operators started servicing people with handhelds. They always had to live with people having a big variety of signal strengths, etc. And then routers came around, and it seems a lot easier just to give a guy a router because you sell it over the counter. So these are the reasons. Initially, you say to a guy, you guys are starting to offer fixed wireless service, often mixed with their mobile. And why don't you put external antennas on? They say, look, we're installing for people, no one is complaining. Okay, so in the beginning, there's enough capacity. Really not a clever thing to do because, of course, there's enough capacity, but already those guys are starting to consume a lot of your capacity. And on the other hand, they're also often not getting very good service. And I think we all know people that got very unhappy trying to use 4G for fixed wireless at home. So it's a very variable type of service. So for them, it's just a cost and hassle. Nobody cares about infrastructure capacity. That's I'm talking the people selling the devices, your so-called consumer side of cellular operators. Remember, they're typically big organizations. And for the capacity guys, says, look, I can't tell the consumer guys to go put antennas up. You know, they make their own decisions in terms of the so-called packages. But if you look at overall company profitability, of course, it makes a lot of sense. So it's often that difference that causes a problem. So in practice, everyone is happy initially. The real problem is that it's quite short-sighted, because very soon the cells start filling up and you get a lot of unhappy consumers, or you find that you have to increase infrastructure, put microcells up, etc., in order to handle more people wanting to have a fixed service. And the problem is that talking between the different divisions. So, like I say, this is a difficult problem also because the organizations are big. Okay, now we've looked at the fact that the operator can increase his profits by a fairly large amount, 250%, using the same infrastructure. It would be a fairly tough spend to go and do the same thing by putting microcells up. So, you know, I would say a clever guy in one of these organizations would say, guys, we're going to spend 150 million this year on upgrading infrastructure. We can save, some we have to, because for mobile, but we can save perhaps 50 million by just starting to issue fixed users and automatically gain a leverage on our infrastructure. But for the users, there's also nice benefits. They get high instantaneous rates. Okay, so got much happier users right from the word go when they've got external antennas. Of course, that in itself reduces churn and increases take-up by word of mouth. The latency is typically much lower. In other words, there's much less multipath, and that makes the things work faster. And it's predictable and reliable. What I mean by that, it's equivalent to ADSL with fiber. Clearly still varies because there's times of the day where there's contention. So they're contention limited, but it's always sort of the same. Yeah, lots of things affected, where you are, how you are, whether the cell phone operator is getting over capacity and starting to cut down a little bit on guys that's smothering. A lot of issues make these guys' life extremely variable. Your dog or your kid walking around close to the router could affect your data rate quite a bit. So there is a very nice advantage in terms of users and user experience on the right-hand side, regardless of the increased profits that you can make with more users in a cell. So foresight, in other words, if you can, foresight can triple your network revenue. That certainly makes a lot of sense. We'll get some kudos. Because of the historical factor, they often blind to this type of thing, and they perceive it as a grudge expense. So when I go to operators, they want to improve some important people, big spenders experience. That's why they put external antennas up. They see it as some expense that they have to incur to solve problems. What they don't realize, what they see as a customer problem should actually have been seen right from the beginning as not a customer problem. This is the network operator's problem. That guy is actually should never have had him. He's actually consuming lots of your infrastructure. So don't consider it as his problem. It can actually increase your capacity, even in a mixed operator environment. If I now go to the different aspects, because one of the problems is this mixed environment, and I feel there's a lot of sense in perhaps starting to split your fixed wireless services from your mobile services. It makes things a lot neater. Okay, I think I may have answered this one. If we now look at common questions, and these are really common, you get them all the time. Do I have to provide antennas for users close to base station? I think I've already sort of illustrated to you that there's so few that close that it makes sense to provide all of them with it. Let's face it, even the guy that's in the second level and still gets good service, the customer's always going to be happy. If you've got a lot of guys there, you're already halving the capacity of your base station. So you can't look at problems. So to go do a case-by-case evaluation to save 5% of installation, that's sort of roughly what it comes down to, is just not useful. It's a complexity that makes no sense. What makes sense, sell a guy with a voucher or something, and you make sure that an external antenna is put up. It's not like an option or gift, or when the guy buys a bigger package, it services the operator. Don't think of it as servicing the customer. Okay, so that's the best way to do it, and you'll make better profits, as we've shown, regardless of the cost of putting it on every single house. Yes, this is the strange enough the one, and I've had cases speaking to local operators, like I say, very clever guys, make no mistake, where the infrastructure guys understand perfectly what I'm saying, and they will openly say to me, look, they understand what I'm saying, but they can't do much about this. They handle infrastructure, so they figure out ways to increase network capacity using microcells, many different technologies, etc. What people do with consumers is not their business, and even in their own organization, I find it difficult to try to sell this across the barriers, but of course, it needs to be done. In that case, I find if they actually create a division or special part doing fixed wireless access, and in my opinion, take a little bit of spectrum, because with, like I say, often there's 25% of your spectrum, you'll be able to serve the same amount of customers as with the other 75% service the mobile users. So take it off, because then you can make that spectrum fully efficient, because even mobile users, of course, impact on a fixed wireless service. If you're only doing fixed wireless, you've got control over the capacity. You can decide how many people are there. They're always in there. You've got lots of other advantages in terms of your parameters that you can set in LTE, which is geared for fast changing signals. So you can reduce forward error correction. You can reduce guard bands. You can reduce the number of tones to do frequency equalization, time equalization, and in that way already get about a 50% increase. So very good idea to actually have it as a separate offering, using the same base stations and equipment, but having almost a separate price offering, separate division handling it that does fixed wireless, because they will immediately understand that to get max out of whatever you allocate for fixed wireless, they need to do this. There would be no doubt about it. So mixing it often dilutes benefits, and it causes confusion, because we're talking to people historically where increasing signal strength on CPEs was never an option. It was always here to live with whatever the mobile devices would give you. Health problems, it's one of my favorites. I think there's been I've often been asked about health due to radiation from cellular towers, and there's been no scientific proof that this happens, but many people believe it does. So it does provide a nice selling argument. Of course, outdoor antennas reduces the amount of cellular radiation you're exposed to considerably, because the outdoors are already about 10 times further away from you, gives you 100 times less exposure, and of course the outdoors still have to penetrate house and so forth. So outdoor antenna certainly makes tons of sense to people that's worried about health issues. And let's face it, who knows, perhaps it may be right. I'm saying there's no evidence. One never, of course, ultimately knows whether there's some impact. I personally don't believe in it, but it sells. Then there's the last part, residential regulations. That's often an issue in terms of installing outdoor antennas. And this is often comes from people installing satellite dishes and big Yagi antennas for terrestrial TV. So that's often why the restriction applies. But if it's a restriction, I think one of the ideas is, of course, using nice panel antennas. If you look at your typical cross-pole antennas like Export 2, Export 1, and you don't need to install them on masts protruding up from the roof. We find you get quite adequate service if you install them below the roof eaves, if you've got a typical house. So in other words, at the lowest part of the roof, under the roof, and then they're not really that visible. Sometimes there's even just plainly objections in some estates, especially private estates. And there one can even use something like the Expo 1. Expo 1 is capable of being pole mounted, wall mounted, but many people forget it's also got 4 suckers and you can mount it against the window. And people also forget you can turn it 180 around, so you can mount it against an internal window. Now, believe it or not, that still gives you about a 10 to 15 dB signal if that window is in the quadrant towards a cell phone tower. I don't want to say it loud, but I had signal problems now, and I almost wish to show a photograph. I've got a hotspot here with my cell phone. It's sitting against the window. Gives me about 5 times increase in speed by positioning it against my window, as opposed to just having it indoor with me. So that is still a very, very good solution. Even though it's technically indoor, it behaves almost like an outdoor antenna, just a little bit lower. And of course, the gain there is fairly omnidirectional. Now we're hitting the questions. I'm hoping that many of you, I've got no visibility of chat boxes and so forth. So I'm just handing over to Elana to see what questions there are. We've got some other panelists. Thank you very much, people of Australia and other parts of Australasia. We also wish to indicate sympathy and strength if any of you have had any problems with the COVID virus. I think we're all suffering from it. Hope you all stay healthy and well.